Hello, friends. Imagine this. One phone call from Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, the same guy who's been bombing Ukraine for years, suddenly says, okay, a 1 week pause. Does this sound like reality or just another episode in the political reality show? Today, we're diving deep into the fresh New York Times article about the so-called energy truce between Russia and Ukraine, supposedly brokered through Trump. This news raises a ton of red flags and serious doubts. I'll break down the motives of all sides and explain why this might not be a victory at all, but a cleverly disguised trap. By the end, you'll understand why a week without strikes could easily turn into months of even greater threats. Let's unpack this step by step. And don't forget to like if you want more deep dives like this. First, the hook. Can one phone call really change the course of a war? According to the New York Times, January 29, 2026, Trump announced during a White House cabinet meeting that he personally asked Putin to stop attacks on Kyiv and other cities for 1 week due to the extreme cold. And according to Trump, Putin agreed. The Kremlin, through spokesman Dmitry Peskov, confirmed, yes, the request was made and Putin, of course, agreed. But here's the catch. This pause lasts only until February 1st, this Sunday, and it's not a full ceasefire. It applies only to strikes on energy infrastructure in Kyiv, where temperatures have dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius, leaving thousands of homes without heat. Millions of Ukrainians are freezing in the dark, and Trump is bragging that he got it done. But why right now? And isn't this just a tactical move? The article cites sources in the U.S. administration and confirmation from the Kremlin. The talks in question are linked to the trilateral meetings held in Abu Dhabi on January 23rd and 24th, the first of their kind since the war began. Participants included Ukrainian representatives, led by RNBO Secretary Rustem Umerov, Russian officials, including GRU head Igor Kostyukov, and U.S. envoys, Trump allies like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. According to the NYT, they discussed an energy truce as a goodwill gesture to create favorable conditions for future negotiations. President Zelensky tweeted that the talks were constructive and said Ukraine is ready for a mutual pause. No strikes on Russian refineries if Russia leaves Ukrainian energy infrastructure alone. But here's the key point. There are no written agreements. Everything is verbal, gentleman's handshake style. Why does this raise so many doubts? First, let's assess the credibility of the information. The New York Times is a reputable outlet with strong sourcing, but even they hedge, if true. Historically, Russia has repeatedly used pauses to regroup and rearm. Remember the Minsk agreements of 2014-2015? On paper, a ceasefire. In reality, thousands dead and the seizure of Debaltseve. Or the quiet periods in 2022-2023. After massive strikes on Ukrainian energy, October 2022 destroyed about 30% of generation capacity. There were weeks of calm, but only so Russia could stockpile Caliber and Kimzhal missiles. Ukrainian military intelligence, GUR, estimates Russia needs 7 to 10 days to prepare a major barrage, exactly the length of this so-called truce. Justification. According to DTEK, Ukraine's largest private energy company, since winter 2025-2026 began, Russia has destroyed 60 to 70% of Ukraine's power generation, leaving people with 3 to 4 hours of electricity per day. A week without strikes isn't humanitarianism. It's breathing room for Russia to repair its own refineries after Ukrainian drone attacks, Tuapse, Yaroslavl, etc. in 2025. Now let's talk about Abu Dhabi. The UAE is a supposedly neutral venue where Trump has long-standing business ties, his hotels in Dubai. The NYT claims Russian negotiators apologized to the Ukrainians for attacks that happened after the verbal deal, specifically mentioning strikes on Odessa and a passenger train. But is that accurate? Sources in Reuters and Bloomberg do not confirm any apologies. Instead, Peskov clarified that the pause applies only to Kyiv and only until February 1st. Justification: Russia continued strikes in other regions, e.g. Kharkiv on January 28th, showing selective compliance. This isn't a truce, it's a PR stunt. Putin is showing Trump flexibility to avoid fresh sanctions. Recall, in December 2025, Trump imposed tariffs on Russian oil imports. And suddenly Putin became open to talks. Why did Putin agree? Not out of kindness, that's not his style. Since 2022, Russia has killed over 10,000 Ukrainian civilians, UN data, including deliberate energy attacks meant to break morale. But right now, Putin is vulnerable. Ukrainian drones in 2025 destroyed 15 to 20% of Russian refining capacity, cutting budget revenues by 10 to 15%. Russian Finance Ministry figures. Brent crude is hovering around $70 per barrel due to oversupply, and Trump's tariffs on third country buyers of Russian oil threaten even bigger losses. Putin fears not Trump personally, but economic collapse. His regime survives on petrodollars that fund the army. Defense budget equals 6% of GDP in 2026. If Ukraine gets long-range missiles, ATACMS from the US, or Storm Shadow Taurus from Europe, it could hit Siberian fields, and that would be game over. So this pause gives Russia time to stockpile 500 to 600 missiles per month. GUR data. Historical parallel. In 1941, Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler, not for peace, but to buy time. We all know how that ended. Trump's motive is simple: a win for his image. He promised during the 2024 campaign to end the war in 24 hours. Now in 2026, he's touting fast results through dialogue. But was this really his achievement? The NYT notes the pause idea was already floating in Abu Dhabi before the call. Trump is a showman and populist. Success for him means selling the narrative. I asked, and Putin said yes. But if the pause collapses, Reuters reports differing interpretations. Kremlin says until Sunday, Zelensky says mutual. Trump loses face. Worse, it plays into Putin's hands. The U.S. holds back new sanctions during dialogue. For Ukraine, this is a double-edged sword. Short-term relief. DTEC can partially repair grids and avoid blackouts during the current freeze. Minus 15 degrees Celsius in Kyiv on January 31st. But long-term, it's risky. If the pause is really just Russia stockpiling, expect a massive barrage after February 1st, similar to October 2022. Ukraine has already lost about 50% of its generation capacity since 2022, and every pause gives Russia the upper hand. Zelensky says mutual, but can Russia be trusted? They've violated every agreement so far. Minsk, Istanbul, 2022. Plus, this weakens pressure on Russia. Europe, Germany, France is already pushing Kyiv to accept peace, and Trump could use it as an excuse to further cut aid, even intelligence sharing, which he has already reduced significantly. Historically, since 2014, Russia has weaponized ceasefires for escalation. After Minsk I, Ilovaisk. After Minsk II, Debaltsev. Hundreds, maybe thousands of violations. Why would it be different now just because Trump is involved? Trump is balancing. He wants stability with Russia, but also projects strength, e.g. seizure of a Russian tanker in January 2026. This isn't altruism, it's geopolitics. Trump wants cheap oil for America, so he pressures Russia lightly, fearing escalation. What about the Russian apologies? The New York Times doesn't elaborate, but Reuters mentions differing interpretations. Russia says only Kyiv. Ukraine says mutual energy truce. The apologies may be unconfirmed leaks from Abu Dhabi or deliberate PR to show constructiveness ahead of the next round on February 1st. We'll know soon. If the pause holds, the verbal energy truce might quietly extend. No signed papers. Why no documents? Because Putin refuses to admit defeat. Acknowledging Ukrainian drones hurt would be humiliating. Russian refining losses from drones reached 5 to 7 billion in 2025, Forbes estimate. And continued attacks could trigger collapse, like Saudi Arabia after Abqaiq 2019. Putin isn't stopped by Trump, he's stopped by fear. Loss of revenue equals social explosion. His regime depends on oil, 40% of budget. And if Ukraine gets Taurus or extended-range ATACMS, Siberian extraction ends. That's how the war could actually be finished, but everyone fears escalation. History is repeating itself, yet Europe and the US keep making the same mistakes. Is this the end of the war? Hardly. Putin wants victory, control of Donbass, demilitarization, and ultimately all of Ukraine. Only a fool doesn't see that. Trump wants a quick peace. Ukraine wants peace without giving away its land. That's completely logical and normal. Without real pressure, sanctions, weapons, this is a trap. It's not a truce, it's a delay. Thank you all. Peace to you. Good luck. And write in the comments, do you believe in this verbal deal? Subscribe, because the next video will cover what happens after February 1st.